Hey everybody, I'm Jason Butt with the Telegraph.
I'm Jordan Hill with the Ledger-Enquirer.
And we're here to break down day 3 of SEC Media Days. We're going to start with the fact that today was Bama Day in Hoover, Alabama. So you know the lobby here at the Winfrey was an absolute madhouse of people trying to get just a glimpse of Nick Saban, hoping to get his autograph. He's the king of college football. Has been, even though they lost to Clemson in the national championship, he's still kind of the guy, the face of the NCAA in this sport. What was your takeaway from Nick Saban today at his appearance at Media Days?
You know, the thing that he kept hitting on, and it seems like it's something he's done before, is talk about, well, how much inexperience they've got this year. And you know, I think something that I've heard several other people say is that, you know, it kind of felt like doom and gloom and like, oh, coming off a bad year. Well, I mean, they were like 10 seconds away from a national championship, another one there at Alabama. You know, the inexperience, I don't see that being any kind of issue. It never is at Alabama with the way they recruit. They bring in those top classes. You know, Saban's trying to say all the right things so that, you know, his team doesn't get too high on themselves, which is part of his, you know, his job. But we all know that there's so much talent there, and that, you know, I don't see there being any issue once Saban and his team take the field.
You hit on the inexperience. Well, it seems every year Nick Saban comes to Media Days, his team's inexperienced, they're young, they got to work. And look, a lot of that's true, but they've also brought in the #1 recruiting class seemingly year after year after year, and if it's not #1, it's #2 or #3. It's in that range. They're bringing in 5-star talent after 5-star talent. I mean, for instance, you got a guy like Deshaun Hand, who has been a rotational player in 2 years. This guy was the #1 overall recruit in the country. He could have gone to a couple of other schools. I remember Michigan being involved in his recruitment. He could have gone there and been an immediate player as a freshman, decided to come to Alabama, waited for 2 years. Now he's going to get his shot after playing behind all those NFL-bound defensive linemen. So, you know, you can say inexperience all you want. They're still absolutely loaded with talent on that roster.
And you know, if there's names that you don't recognize, give it a game or two. I'm sure that they're going to be all over the field. You know, it's just, you know, why would you doubt Nick Saban coming in this one?
Especially still with the guys they do get back. Quarterback Jalen Hurts, very impressive as a true freshman. Yeah, they got to develop him more as a passer, but just look at how he performed in a clutch situation last year against Clemson with that late read option for a touchdown. Mika Fitzpatrick at cornerback, Ronnie Harrison at safety. I mean, those guys are all SEC players. Mika Fitzpatrick very well could be All-American at the end of this season. You got Bo Scarborough, who really seemed to finally come into his own late in the year. He had the leg injury in the national championship. You got to wonder. I mean, it's hard to play the what-if game because injuries are a major part of the game, and it's a risk you obviously take in this sport. But if he doesn't get hurt, the way he was starting to roll running the ball against Clemson, you have to wonder if it's a different story in that game. But again, I mean, this is a broken record here. They're loaded.
We're just going to save this and maybe change some names for next year because I'm sure
it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's going to be the exact same.
And I want to, you know, kind of hit on what you said about Jalen Hurts. I mean, you were seeing him make plays as a freshman that, like you mentioned, that touchdown he had against Clemson. You know that all the opponents that are going to be playing Alabama in these next few years just collectively groaning because he's making plays and making people look foolish as a freshman. Just wait till he gets more time with that coaching staff and gets more polished. I mean, it's just going to be unreal.
Now, Alabama wasn't the only team here today, even though they were
contrary to popular belief.
they were the major draw, but there were 3 other teams. One of them, Missouri. Now, Missouri is likely going to be picked in the SEC East cellar, I should say, once again. But here's one, or you could say 2 reasons they may not end up as the last team in the SEC East when it's all said and done, and it's the combination between Drew Lock and Jamon Moore. These guys were able to connect at a huge rate over the last 3 games last year. Jamon Moore got over 1,000 yards receiving last year. Drew Lock, 3,399 passing yards last year, 27, I believe, touchdowns that he threw. The rapport that those two have stems back to when Drew Lock was visiting a practice during his senior season, a spring practice. Jamon Moore coming off his redshirt season. just went up to him, wanted to toss him a football, said, let's throw some. Really, ever since then, the two guys have been friends, really developed chemistry with one another. Look for them to have a big year throwing the ball, and they're going to have to. They only returned 5 starters on defense from a unit that really was not a good group last year. They're going to have to outscore opponents in a major way if they're going to win games.
And then you look at the times when Missouri was really competitive in the SEC East, a lot of it was because of their defense, especially their defensive line was so dominant. You don't really seem to have that this year, like you mentioned. Drew Lock is a guy that's thrown for a ton of yards. Just go look back at that Georgia game. I mean, it was just back and forth through the air. You know, the connection that they've got there, quarterback and receiver, you know, sometimes you hear it, it's kind of like lip service, but looking at, you know, having a chance to talk to those guys, you can really tell that there's a really, you know, a strong connection there. And if Missouri's going to have, you know, the chance to really compete in the East, they're going to need to really rely on that.
They are, absolutely. Shifting to a potential SEC seller team in the West, Texas A&M. And seller may not be the right word because in the last few years,
you know,
you're at the bottom. Yeah. You're at the bottom. You know, you're talking about sub 500. But Texas A&M, they're looking at, I think when the preseason predictions come out, they're looking at a preseason 5, 6, or 7 in the West. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they'll have a losing record. I mean, the West is once again stacked. Kevin Sumlin, I mean, he got the question here today. His job's on the line if he doesn't win enough games this year. I mean, do you agree with that assumption?
I think so. I mean, you know, they've been a perennial 8-5 team, which is not terrible, but you want to see progress at a team like Texas A&M. You know, Kevin Sumlin addressed, you know, the speculation about his job security and said, you know, look, you know, nobody puts more pressure on me than I do. And, you know, he knows he's a veteran coach. He knows what he's signed up for. But it just seems like this is really not the opportune year to really have a lot of questions, considering how much talent Texas A&M has lost. And, you know, there's just, you know, he's going to have to figure out a lot in a hurry if he's going to be able to sustain his tenure there in College Station.
They stumbled down the stretch with Myles Garrett on the roster. He's not there anymore. Questions at quarterback, outside of Christian Kirk. Questions at receiver, considering they lost their other 3 top receivers from that team. There's a lot going on there that's really concerning if you're a Texas A&M fan with Kevin Sumlin still at the helm. He's going to have to put on maybe the best coaching job of his career. Lastly, Kentucky. This is a team I buy what they're selling almost every year. It seems like when they come to SEC Media Days. Will they prove me wrong once again?
I don't really think so. I mean, looking at the talent that they've got, you know, I kind of had a lot of questions about Mark Stoops going into last season. Really proved me wrong. You know, they had a lot of really good games, nearly beat Georgia at a game we were both at. It came down to a field goal at the end. You know, everything I see about Kentucky and the amount of returning starters they have, you know, if they can just get, you know, the quarterback a little bit better, more polished throwing the ball, you know, I think they can really compete. You know, I've got them winning 8 games, and I think they can really compete in sort of that upper echelon of the East.
Stephen Johnson, the quarterback he mentioned, great running threat. Benny Snell, absolute beast of a running back. I think he might be the second best running back in this conference behind Nick Chubb. The offensive line returns intact. Really, the point, I agree with your point, they have to get more out of Stephen Johnson throwing the ball. And if that's able to happen, and this is a balanced offense, you're talking about a couple of upsets that they could potentially have against teams from either side of the SEC, in my opinion, with the returning experience. Look at their defense, for instance. Jordan Jones at linebacker, Mike Edwards at safety, Courtney Love at linebacker. They've got to get better production out of their D-line, though. They were not a good team rushing the passer, and that really hurt them, held them back last season. That was probably the difference, or one of the major differences from them being able to finish out what started as a bad year, 45-7 loss to Florida, and in week 2 to where they actually had a shot at the SEC East. In the last third of the season.
And I think you got to really give credit to Stoops and really that whole team. They were 0-2. You mentioned that loss to Florida. Yep. They lost, in a really embarrassing fashion in the game before that against Southern Miss, in a game they were dominating. Really looked like the writing was on the wall. They figured it out, and I really see that, given everything we've already talked about, that they could, really turn out what could be Stoops' best season at Kentucky.
We'll see if Kentucky proves me wrong again. I'm riding the bandwagon again. I keep telling myself I won't, but I'm doing it. But on that note, I'm Jason Butt with the Telegraph. He's Jordan Hill with the Ledger-Enquirer. Thanks for watching. Take care.